Welcome to this week's episode of Reading the Gospels Through Hebrew Eyes. We're going to take a look at the opening part of Luke chapter 15 today. So the second half of Luke 15 is the parable that almost everybody knows. It's the parable of the prodigal son, which was read in church a few months ago. The first part of Luke 15 kind of sets the stage for the rest of the chapter. It talks about this grumbling that was going on between the scribes and the Pharisees as they saw that Jesus had the audacity to welcome sinners and to eat with them. So we're going to take a look at that opening dialogue, some of the language that's used there with regard to what this grumbling was all about. And then we're going to look at those opening two parables about a lost sheep and then also about a lost coin. So let's jump right in to kind of see how the stage is set in these opening 2 or 3 verses. So this is Luke 15, 1 and 2. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." Now the first thing I want you to notice is how our chapter divisions so often throw us off in our printed English Bibles. Because the last verse of chapter 14 says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." And then the very opening verse of chapter 15 tells us who was hearing. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him. So as happens very many times in our Bibles, we let those chapter divisions or even verse divisions or sometimes topic headings throw us off, and we fail to see how, of course, originally this text was just all together. In fact, there weren't even any spaces between the letters, to tell you the truth, in the original Greek. There certainly weren't any chapter divisions or verse divisions. So kind of bear that in mind when you're reading through your English versions. And here you see how the ones who had the ears to hear were the sinners and the tax collectors. Now, sinners, kind of a strange designation. Aren't we all sinners? So why were some singled out? Well, keep in mind when you're reading the scriptures that there are many different ways in which that designation is used. So, for instance, yes, of course, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So in some cases in scriptures, when it talks about sinners, it's just talking about humanity in general, everybody. There are some occasions where that designation of sinners is used specifically to refer to non-Jews, to Gentiles. It's also used in the Gospels and other places to talk about those who lead immoral lives or those who have dishonorable jobs. Maybe they're a thief or maybe they're a prostitute, whatever it might be. Those are sometimes categorized as sinners, which could be what is meant in Luke chapter 15. But also, sinners are those who don't conform to the way the Pharisees interpreted the scriptures and the way they practiced their own piety. So that also might be why that designation is used here. Now, in early rabbinic literature, there was a phrase called Am Haaretz, which literally means people of the land, but that was another. It was a very pejorative term used to kind of the uneducated, those who didn't follow the rules of purity, and so they too would have been classified as quote unquote sinners in early rabbinic literature. So the tax collectors, which I'm assuming most of you are familiar with. I mean, they were viewed as basically Jewish turncoats. They were working for the Roman government. They were taking more than they were supposed to take. So they were just, the worst of the worst. So the tax collectors and then the sinners, they were drawing near because they had ears to hear what Jesus had to say. And the response to the Pharisees and the scribes is that they grumbled. Now, that's a fascinating word. So let's take a look at that word, a very closely related word, and then its Hebrew counterpart in the Old Testament to see kind of what is being winked at here by the evangelist Luke as he uses this language to talk about what was happening when the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you see a Greek verb, diagongudzo, and that's the one that is used here in Luke 15:2 about the grumbling or the complaining. It's sometimes translated as murmuring. And that only occurs 2 times in the New Testament, and they're both in Luke. So here in Luke 15:2, And then in a very, very similar situation in Luke 19:7, when Jesus is eating with the tax collector, Zacchaeus, in the city of Jericho. And when they saw it, what happened? They all grumbled, and they said, he has gone to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. So notice both those times that that verb is used in Luke, it's similar context. Jesus is eating with someone that the uber pious think that he should not be eating with. Then, if you move to the middle of your screen, you see a very closely related verb, gongudzo. This occurs more times, 8 times in the New Testament. Most of these are in the Gospels. One is in 1 Corinthians 10. But for instance, if you go to Luke 5, the Pharisees and the scribes gongudzo, they grumbled at his disciples. They said, why do you, and in Texas we would say y'all, because that's the second person plural in the Greek. So why do y'all eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Notice, same kind of situation there too. They're grumbling, they're gongudzo, because Jesus is not acting in accordance with the way that they think he should be acting according to their preconceived notions. Now, with that in mind, look on the left-hand side of your screen at the Greek verb, the Hebrew verb that corresponds to these Greek verbs. And that is, it's a lamed vav nun. So in Hebrew, this is the verb that occurs 14 times in Exodus 15 through 17 and in Numbers 14 through 17. It's got one occurrence in Joshua as well. But the infamous grumbling of the Israelites in the wilderness, that is the Hebrew verb that is used there. And in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the counterpart part of this Hebrew verb is almost always either gongudzo or diagongudzo, those two verbs that occurs in the Gospels. Now, think about it. When the Israelites were grumbling against Moses or Aaron or the Lord himself, what was happening? This was not simply them complaining. It was more than a complaint. It was a verbal indictment coming from these sinners of the ways that God had chosen to act among them. Every time they grumbled or murmured, they were essentially saying, we know better than God how God should be conducting himself. Now put all that together, and you see how there is a continuum between the grumbling of the Israelites in the wilderness and the grumbling of the Pharisees and the scribes and others about what Jesus is doing. In all these cases, those who are grumbling, murmuring, complaining, they are indicting God, either Yahweh in the Old Testament or Yahweh in the flesh, Jesus in the New Testament, saying, you are acting in a way that is not in accord with the way that we think you should act. In other words, it was just pure hubris to say that we know better than God. So that's why they're grumbling. And the basic complaint is this. This man, which is pejorative in the Greek, by the way, this guy, this man does what? 2 things. Receives sinners and he eats with them. The verb receive in Greek is prosdekomai. It can be translated accept or receive, or I like welcome. This guy welcomes sinners. Oh, the audacity of him to welcome sinners. And not only that, as if that's not bad enough, he sun estheo. He eats with them. So the eats with is one word in Greek. He eats with them. So that's the basic complaint. Jesus welcomes sinners. He hangs out with them. He doesn't turn them away. He doesn't keep them at a distance. In fact, quite the opposite. He welcomes them. He calls them. He embraces them. And as we'll see in the 2 parables that are about to come up, he actually goes searching for them. He doesn't just simply like welcome them. He goes hunting for them. He searches them out. That's his mission. And not only that, but he shares table fellowship with them. He shares life with them. He shares table and bread and wine with them, which in that culture would basically be to say that I accept you into my communion, as it were. I accept you into my life. So Jesus welcomes sinners. He eats with sinners. And in so doing, he insults the piety of the Pharisees and the scribes because they wanted to keep their distance from these people that they consider to be sinners, or at least ritually impure, or perhaps just not quite as holy as they themselves were. So, with that all said, Jesus then goes on to begin these three lost parables. So that's why Luke 15 includes these three: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then, of course, the lost son, or the prodigal son. So we're going to take a look at these parables now. The first of which is the lost sheep. This is verses 3 through 7. So Jesus told them this parable. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he's lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he's found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. By the way, that last phrase about the 99 that don't need repentance, that's probably meant to be ironic, tongue-in-cheek, as a kind of a jibe against the Pharisees who think that they don't need repentance. Notice too, you can't. It's not a little bit fuzzy in the artwork here, but this is one of the earliest depictions of Jesus in Christian art. There's several of these anyway that depict him as the Good Shepherd. So this one is from the Roman catacombs. It's from the 3rd century. It was a very popular way to picture Jesus in early Christian art. Now, as you look at that text, that first parable, which, by the way, is paralleled in the Gospel of Matthew, not exactly the same phraseology, but very similar themes that you find there. So as you look at that, what words or themes stick out that are going to be repeated in the next couple of parables? Well, there's at least 4 of these. Number 1, something or someone is lost. Of course, in the first parable, it's a sheep. Secondly, there is a search. The shepherd, in this case, goes looking for him. He searches for him. Then, thirdly, he finds that which is lost. And then, the best part of this is that he rejoices. In this case, there's a double rejoicing. When he finds it, he puts it on his shoulders, rejoicing. He actually rejoices because he's actually going to bear the burden home. He's happy. He's happy to not only just to find the lost sheep, but he's even happy, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, also for the joy set before him endured the weight of this lost animal, bringing him home. And then when he gets home, he throws a party. He calls together his friends and says, Rejoice in me because I found my sheep which was lost. So something is lost, something is searched for, something is found, and the culmination of all this is joy, rejoicing, because that which is lost has been found and brought home again, and then become part of the community. Now notice, what did the sheep do to be found? Nothing. What did the sheep do to get himself back? Nothing. This was all divine initiative. It was the divine heart that drove the shepherd to look. It was the divine heart that rejoiced to bear the lost one home. It was the divine heart that said, Let us rejoice because I have found that which was lost. The sheep, we might say, as Luther said, what do we contribute to our salvation? Nothing but sin and rebellion. Well, what did the sheep contribute to his being found? Well, nothing but becoming lost. That's it. We don't contribute anything to our salvation. We don't contribute anything to our repentance. It's all a gift of God. He is the one who finds us, searches for us, brings us home, and then rejoices with us. Now, this idea of a sheep getting lost is echoed in a number of Old Testament passages. A couple that come to mind are these. Number 1, Isaiah 53, that famous chapter, of course, about the crucifixion of the Messiah. Isaiah 53:6. All we like sheep, so not some, but all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him, that is this suffering servant, the iniquity of us all. And then Psalm 119, 176. I've always loved this. So you pray, all the way through Psalm 119, all these verses in this long acrostic psalm. You get to the very end, and you hear this: I have gone astray like a lost sheep. Seek your servant, for I do not forget your commandments. So the idea of a lost sheep, of course, very, very common way of describing either individuals or the entirety of humanity in the Old Testament. Now, the imagery of shepherds and sheep, of course, is also extremely prevalent in the prophets. One example is from Ezekiel Chapter 34, which in some churches is going to be the Old Testament reading for this coming Sunday. I've got it on the screen. Just a few of the phrases that are there. This whole chapter is certainly worthy of your attention if you're wanting to look at the theme of shepherds and sheep, because the chapter, first of all, indicts the leaders of Israel for being terrible shepherds, for not taking care of the flock. And then God says, you know what? I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. I will rescue them. I'll bring them back. I'll gather them. I'll feed them. I'll be their shepherd, so on and so forth through Ezekiel chapter 34, which, of course, is exactly what is happening in the parable that Jesus tells. So the shepherd, of course, who goes and searches for the lost sheep is, in the Old Testament, the Lord. And now we see in this parable, Jesus applying it to himself, saying, that Lord in the Old Testament, that's me, God in the flesh, and I'm the one who seeks this lost sheep. By the way, if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into the image of Good Shepherd and sheep in the Old Testament, a few months ago I did a video entitled Jesus, the Hanukkah Good Shepherd, which you can find on the 1517 YouTube channel. I'll try and remember and add that in the notes at the bottom of this video so that if you're interested, you can click on that and watch what I have there. Now, that's the first parable. Now we're about to hear a second parable. And it's interesting, on more than one occasion, when Jesus tells more than one parable, he tells a parable about a man, then he tells a parable about a woman. So, for instance, in Luke 13, you have a man who sowed a grain of mustard seed in his garden. And then right after that, Jesus says, a woman took leaven and hid it in 3 measures of flour. So a parable about a man's actions, a parable about a woman's action. Same thing is happening in Luke 15. You have this man having 100 sheep, goes after the one which is lost. And now we're about to hear about a woman who lost a coin and searches the house for it. So both of those both chapters have this same kind of thematic unity. A man parable, a woman parable. So, what is a parable about the woman? Well, this is verses 8 through 10. Or what woman, Jesus goes on to say, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search diligently until she finds it? And when she's found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I found the coin that I had lost. Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. The silver coin, by the way, translations will vary as to how they translate this, but it's drachme or drachma in Greek. And this silver coin, which is a drachma, it's equal to a denarius, which we also hear about in the Gospels, and that is basically a day's pay for the average laborer. So, of course, some of the similar themes are present in this parable as well. You have an object which is lost. You have a search that's conducted until the object is found. And then the result of that is that there is great rejoicing over this object which is found. So just like with the lost sheep, so here with the lost coin, the sheep and the coin don't get themselves found. They don't get themselves back. Instead, it's entirely the work of the shepherd and the woman. Both pictures of how God searches for us, finds us, and then rejoices because he's brought us back. It's all about him. It's all about his grace. It's all about the heart of God that will stop at nothing to get us back. And don't you love the fact that the one overarching reaction that God has when he brings sinners to himself, and you see this in the parable of the prodigal son as well, is not shaming. It's not lecturing. God doesn't wag his fingers in the face of the sinner and say, I'll forgive you this time, but don't let it happen again. No. The overarching reaction of God when he brings sinners home is, joy, happiness. God rejoices to bring sinners home. So when you think about the heart of God, think about the heart that rejoices to have that which is lost found, whether it's that coin, whether it's that sheep, or whether in the next parable it's that son. That's the attitude that God has toward us. And let me leave you with this quote from Robert Capon. This is from his book on the parables entitled Kingdom, Grace, and Judgment, where in one of the pages he says, in talking about these parables, lostness is exactly Christ's cup of tea. And by that he means when someone is lost, they're in the perfect position for Christ to find them, because that's what he delights in doing. He will search us out, he will find us, he will bring us home to his Father, and there will be great rejoicing among the angels of God and a smile in the face of God himself when he brings us home to him. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope that you're all doing well, and I will see you back again next week.